Today we're hearing Turning Chaos into Growth, Creating an Anti-Fragile Organization with Chip Huth. Between our second session today and the ones we had last week, we received more than 1,000 new registrations. So that means a lot of you are here with us for the first time today. And welcome, we're glad to see you. I hope you'll be happy to know that the previous two sessions that we had in this series will be available to you by recording now that you've registered. So we hope you'll take the time to watch those. Later today, you will receive a link to this recording, so you can expect to get an email with that, as well as further details on the presentation we have tomorrow, which is We Are All Doctors, How Outward Mindset Creates Unity in Chaos with Dr. Laura Lambert. Well, that chat feature is just whizzing by. I know we get a lot of people online here. We love to see you participate in the conversation. However, we know that a lot of your questions do get lost in that turbine as it moves along. So if you have other questions or questions you really want to make sure that we see, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A where our moderators can see those questions. This is also concurrently being broadcast on YouTube. So if you have any technical difficulties, please go ahead and head over to YouTube where you'll be able to watch that outside of the Zoom platform if you have any issues. One of the great things that we've seen in these presentations or throughout both of our webinar series is a lot of social engagement where you're sharing on your social media accounts what you've been learning, pictures of yourself watching the presentation, notes of the things that you've learned. And please, we invite you to continue doing that. It's really great to see. So please share anything that you've learned today using the hashtag outward mindset, so we'll be able to keep track and see what you're getting out of this. It's one of my favorite things to see. For best viewing on this, not everyone will have this option because it is dependent on your internet connection, but while Chip is presenting and concurrently has his PowerPoint up, you should see a black slider bar that will allow you to resize to your preferred orientation. That, like I said, it's going to be dependent on your internet connection, so you may or may not have that capability. If you do, I encourage you to use it so that you can watch it in the way that's best for you. And now I have the unmitigated pleasure of introducing Chip Huth. Some of you know him from his story in The Outward Mindset, an Arbinger's best-selling book, or you may have seen him or learned about him in one of our many trainings or even heard him speak in person. In addition to serving as a senior consultant with Arbinger, Chip Huth has 28 years of law enforcement experience and is the state of Missouri's defensive tactics subject matter expert. Chip is also an accomplished author and former president of the National Law Enforcement Training Center. Chip is an absolute joy to have around, and while I wish I could have him here in this empty studio with me, we all recognize the constraints of that, so Chip has been so kind to join us from his home and dial in to be here with us today. Chip is an absolute joy to be around and to talk to and to listen to, so I hope you all enjoy hearing from Chip today and understand what a good guy Chip is. He does so much in his community and so much to turn the world outward, and I'm so glad that he's here with us. And now, without any further introduction needed, Chip Huth.
All right, so welcome to session 3 of Arbinger's webinar series titled Forging Resilience in Chaos. This COVID-19 pandemic is forcing us to radically adapt to new ways of working and interacting with one another, both personally and professionally. I'm not going to attempt to tell you today what you need to be doing in your organizations. My sense is that you are the experts in what you do. Rather, I'm going to share with you some lessons that I have learned about how we show up with others in what we do. Often the difference between success and failure during a crisis boils down to how we understand and execute around our collective responsibilities. So we've titled this series Forging Resilience in Chaos. So I thought I might begin by briefly contrasting order and chaos. One way of thinking about these concepts is to consider that order and chaos are both essential elements of existence. If you think about the Chinese yin and yang symbol, it graphically represents the interplay between these two unseen forces. These forces are woven into the fabric of existence in such a way that we are constantly seeking a balance between the two. Too much order can lead to tyranny, and too much chaos is simply untenable. Clearly, the COVID-19 crisis has tilted us too much into the realm of chaos. which invites anxiety and doubt. While we're striving now to reestablish some order into our lives as we contend with much uncertainty, the way out of our current dilemma is straight through it. There's a seed of chaos in every ordered system, lying in wait for the opportunity to throw a wrench into our best laid plans. Conversely, there's always a seed of order in most chaotic circumstances. And it is within this knowledge, right? It's that knowledge that we have about that seed of order that we can leverage and find what we need to not only survive this pandemic, but to come out the other side stronger for having had the experience. As I said, we titled this series Forging Resilience in Chaos, but I'm of the opinion that resilience is not enough. So with that in mind, that I want to introduce you to the concept of anti-fragility, which was first put forward by the scholar Nassim Taleb. So what do we mean when we use the term anti-fragile to describe a person, system, or an organization? Let's begin by defining anti-fragility by discussing what it is not. Let's think about fragility first. Something is considered fragile when it's easily harmed by external stressors or unforeseen disruptions to the status quo. An example would be a ceramic flower pot, a glass vase, or a teacup. If I were to knock one of these fragile objects onto the floor of my office here, they would likely shatter. They simply can't withstand much volatility. Likewise, a person or an organization or even a system that can't hold up to a reasonable amount of disruption could be considered fragile. Now let's think about resiliency. Now, resiliency is colloquially understood to be the opposite of fragility. Systems or people who remain relatively unaffected or unaltered by external stressors, they're often characterized as resilient. Resiliency implies a natural resistance to change up to a point. Consider a rubber ball or a steel beam, maybe even a barbell. Those are resilient objects. So something that is fragile is easily broken, and something that is resilient can withstand a lot of stress without being significantly changed. I can bounce a rubber ball off the floor of my office here 1,000 times, and the resistance provided by the floor is unlikely to change the ball in any visible way. People or systems that quote unquote weather the storm and continue to force old paradigms onto novel operating environments without losing or gaining too much could be considered resilient. Clearly, the opposite of fragility is not resilience. The opposite of fragility is anti-fragility. Now, anti-fragile is a term used to describe something that actually benefits from measured amounts of stress, harm, or disorder. Consider the effects of physical exercise on the body. Jumping rope leverages the resistance provided by the floor, the same floor that caused the fragile object to break, or the same floor that caused the resilient object to remain unchanged. We leverage that resistance that's provided by that floor when we're jumping rope to improve the body's physical condition. When we go to the gym and we lift weights, the iron that we press and pull, it supplies resistance. As we work to overcome that resistance, we damage our muscle fibers. During prescribed rest periods, those fibers regenerate into a stronger version of themselves, enabling us to move more weight in subsequent trips to the gym. Now, actual adaptation occurs as a result of failure. A fragile system will tend to crumble when it faces a loss, and a resilient system will merely tolerate failure and kind of gut it out. However, an anti-fragile system is a system that actually embraces failure and responds by growth and adaptation. An anti-fragile person leverages setbacks to prepare for the next challenge or calamity. For example, think about a toddler learning to walk. Now, that's a very chaotic process. The toddler literally relies on failure to acquire the ability to walk. With every tumble and fall, the child learns how to make slight adjustments to their posture and improve their form as they stumble through attempt after attempt until they eventually succeed. Chaos and randomness lead to growth. In fact, they are essential for growth. The body's immune system, which is a learning system, is actually anti-fragile. Think about it. A vaccine essentially consists of a fragmented version of a virus, which is then introduced into the body. Once exposed to the virus in this way, the body develops an immunity that will help protect it from future exposures. So how do we work to build an anti-fragile organization? I'm going to discuss 3 steps that I think are essential. Step 1 is to honor the core truth about others. There's a fundamental truth about others that's often easy to ignore. We have to honor that truth in order to take our first step towards anti-fragility. I would like to use one of Arbinger's foundational frameworks to briefly explore 2 ways I can show up with others. So in this framework here, you can see what we call at Arbinger, the inward mindset. So remember, rule number 1 when faced with a crisis or challenge, do not make it worse. I should never underestimate my ability to make things worse. I am perfectly equipped to make anything I touch significantly worse. I would say the same is true for any of us. And the way I begin to make things worse is by choosing to see those with whom I interact as objects instead of people. When I enter into this inward mindset way of seeing, you can see that this diagram suggests that I literally wall myself off from others. Others cease to be people to me. I'm not alive to the fact that they matter like I matter. I'm not alive to the fact that they have hopes, needs, fears, dreams, objectives, things they need to accomplish throughout the day. I literally am blind to that reality when I enter that inward mindset way of seeing, right? In this way of seeing, others, instead of becoming people to me, they are more like objects. I think about them only in terms of whether or not they can help me get what I want, whether or not maybe they can block me from getting what I want. Are they in my way? And if they can't help me and they can't hurt me, then perhaps they don't matter at all. And as you can see, this is a false way of seeing. I'm seeing the world in a way that it only exists in this reality I've created in my head. And so you can tell this inward mindset way of seeing the world, of interacting with people, is very fragile. Now, let's contrast that with the outward mindset. How do I show up in a way that's likely to make things incrementally better? I must begin by seeing and responding to the reality of others. See, the core truth about others is that they are people just like me. They have hopes, needs, fears, dreams. They have things they need to get done. When I'm operating from an outward mindset, I'm alive to these truths about others, and I structure my work in a way that takes into account the impact my efforts have on others' ability to accomplish the tasks they need to address. So in this way of working, I'm still going to accomplish the things I need to accomplish. I'm still responsible for doing my job, but I'm going to structure my work in a way that actually takes into account the work others need to accomplish. And I'm going to perform those tasks and my duties in a way that actually helps others achieve their duties. So it's like sanding with the grain. I'm basically in an outward mindset, I'm reducing the unnecessary friction that's created when I wall myself off from other people. So the outward mindset is a very anti-fragile way of operating. So another way to think about this concept, we can contrast objects with people. As we discussed, an object like a glass vase or a teacup, it's fragile and it can be negatively affected when exposed to slight volatility. Steel beams and rubber balls can be characterized as resilient because they resist change when stressed. Objects and people can be either fragile or resilient to some degree. However, only a person can be anti-fragile. While an object can be negatively affected by or relatively indifferent to chaos, a person can actually benefit from exposure to pressure or stress. We must keep that distinction in mind, especially when leading others. One implication of objectifying others is that we have a tendency to place unrealistic limits on them. We will hesitate to challenge them in meaningful ways. We will, if you don't challenge someone, if you hesitate to do that, right, you don't think they can handle it, then what we do is we actually stymie their growth and development. Remember, they need resistance to get better. They need a challenge. They need a burden to be up against. So the tendency on the part of managers to objectify their direct reports often manifests as micromanagement, which that seems logical. From an inward mindset perspective, micromanagement seems logical, because the manager might have the idea that, they have no faith in a person's capability to grow and challenge. But it's obviously a false way of understanding people and their relation to stress. So the first step toward anti-fragility is to acknowledge the core truth about our customers and colleagues. Everyone with whom we interact is a person first before they are anything else. At our most inward moments, we tend to lose sight of this fundamental truth. If we are fragile, our tendency is to see those around us as a means to an end, rather as people with independent hopes, needs, fears, and dreams. With a fragile mindset, I tend to see others only in terms of how they frustrate my efforts, how they can help me achieve my goals. If they can't help me and they can't hinder me, I will likely see them as irrelevancies. This way of looking at the world is false, and it helps keep me locked in a fragile inward mindset. With an inward mindset, I'm making tactical and strategic decisions and what is essentially a virtual reality that I've created in my own mind. Every decision I make in this virtual reality is fundamentally flawed because it is generated from a false view of the world. The first critical step toward becoming anti-fragile is seeing people as they actually are. People are not a mere means to an end, but an end in and of themselves. So next, we must acknowledge reality and honestly assess our strengths and vulnerabilities. We must carefully distinguish between the things over which we have control and the things over which we do not have control, the things that are simply not up to us. Now, the ancient Stoics, they understood the necessity of this simple act. They worked to divide all experiences into one of two categories: things that are under our control and things that are not under our control. Their philosophy revolved around acceptance of the things over which they had no influence, like the weather, and active effort in the domain of the things they did control. We can't do anything about the rain. However, we can choose to stay inside and read a book or grab an umbrella before heading out. This current crisis is clearly representative of something over which we have little to no control. Obsessing over every news update or press conference isn't likely to do anything but increase our anxiety. What is within our control is how we choose to see others and how we choose to frame the challenges posed by social distancing, remote working, etc. We have within our power the ability to choose to see these things as an opportunity to practice virtues that we could otherwise take for granted. Viktor Frankl suggested that everything we have can be taken from us with the exception of one thing, the last of the human freedoms. That's the freedom to choose our response to anything that happens to us. Lastly, we must possess radical self-awareness to recognize that we have both great potential and necessary limitations. We must regulate our exposure to stressors to the best of our ability to ensure that we do not overwhelm our system. Too much stress combined with not enough recovery time has the potential to break us, even the strongest of us. Just like going to the gym every day and hitting the weight pile without taking time off to recover will actually be counterproductive and harmful. We have to build in respites from the pressure by intentionally scheduling downtime to recharge. We have to recharge. So reading, taking a walk, engaging in non-work related conversations, those things can all help us recharge. Simply taking 5 minutes to focus on our breathing can have a miraculous rejuvenating benefits. Much of our technology tends to work better when we unplug it for 5 minutes. Perhaps that's something that people and objects do have in common. I'm going to close by sharing an iterative framework that you can begin using immediately to help instantiate the principles of anti-fragility into your daily routine. So we call this framework SAM. I'm going to walk you through this acronym real quick. So the S stands for see others. So the first thing I can do in any situation is I can choose to see others. I can get intensely curious about their goals, objectives, their needs. I can start to really want to see them as a person, really get inside and explore the corners of all the things that challenge them. That's step one, see others. And then based on what I learn, I want to adjust my efforts. I want to ask myself, given what I know now, are there things I can do, minor adjustments I can make to my work, to my efforts that might benefit in some way or help in some way these other folks that I've become curious about? So see others and then adjust efforts. And then lastly, I want to measure impact. I want to set some type of a regular cadence where I can follow up with this person or these people or these groups or these teams to see if the things that I'm doing are still helpful or still relevant. Certainly in some circumstances, I might see others and adjust efforts, and that might be going well for a while. But when I check back in with them, I find that the situation has shifted. And what I was doing before is no longer helpful. So I need to, again, go back through that iteration and make those adjustments. I'm going to share with you a personal example from my team at work that happened recently. So Kansas City, Missouri, like many cities, have been placed on a stay-at-home order. And the parking control team that is nested within my division, they sat down and they started talking about this lockdown, right? The stay-at-home order. And they started thinking, and the conversation was really rich. It was like, the first question was, what would it be like to be the people that are negatively impacted by this lockdown? The people who perhaps can't go to work. They've lost essential income. Their kids are at home, so now they're struggling with the challenge of trying to do homeschooling and things like that. And this conversation became really rich. And so they thought, well, listen, based on what we're thinking about, the way we're thinking about these folks, is there something we can do to adjust our efforts, something we can do to modify our work, given the current challenges, that might actually be helpful to these folks that are in these situations? And so they thought, well, look, we are going to stop enforcing any type of parking ordinance that doesn't directly affect safety, right? What a great idea. And so we got the message out on social media, and we pushed it out to the city, and we started rolling that effort out. And so we get to the measure the impact part. Sure enough, as luck would have it, we have a nurse and her partner. They had called the city, and they had asked them if they had permission to park in what would normally be a no parking zone. Of course, the city said yes, based on our understanding with the police department, that's you can park there. And they did. So here comes this nurse who's already fatigued from working 12-hour plus shifts at the hospital. She comes out and finds that her car and her partner's car have been towed. It turns out I did not do a really good job of communicating that we still needed to enforce parking along the rush hour areas, where traffic, people still going to their essential jobs, were flowing at a pretty good pace. And, we had to worry about kids coming out from between the cars and possibly being struck. So we had to enforce those laws, but I didn't communicate that well, right? There was a disconnect. So now we go back through the iteration, see others. What would it be like to be this healthcare provider, right? And to have her and her partner's car towed away. They can't get to work. They're under stress. They're overworked. You start to get a sense of what that might feel like. So then what? Adjust efforts. What do we do? Well, we send a couple team members over. We pick her and her partner up. We drive them out to the tow lot. We void the tickets. We release the cars at no cost to the nurse and her partner, and we get them back on the road, right? Back on, get their life back on track. They shouldn't have to suffer because of my failure to communicate properly, right? Then we contact the city and we recraft the message, push it back out so that people understand they can expect us to enforce those ordinances in those areas. So again, see people, adjust effort, measure impact. You can see how useful that framework might be to you. So how important is it that we find a way to grow during this current crisis? Consider that it is likely we will never go back to business as usual. The current climate is exposing organizations to a level of volatility that will force them to choose between irrelevancy and adaptation. So there's a lot of you, and if you think about the world, right? There's a lot of the world and a little bit of you. You're going to bump up against the world, and it's going to scar you up a bit. Suffering and chaos are inevitable. As I've said before, they are woven into the fabric of existence. It's been said that you can't choose not to suffer, but you can often choose how you suffer. For instance, you can choose to suffer through a regular exercise program, or you can choose to suffer from the effects of poor health. We can suffer from voluntarily exposing ourselves to manageable amounts of stress, or we can suffer from being overwhelmed and crushed when unexpected obstacles appear in our path. Even though this current crisis isn't something to which we voluntarily exposed ourselves, it has nonetheless presented us with the same opportunity to adapt, grow, and reemerge better for having had to contend with it. People and organizations who willingly expose themselves and learn to embrace disorder and chaos, they have a leg up on those that take comfort in routine and predictability. Just as our muscles grow stronger through resistance training, our ability to adapt and improve is predicated on our exposure to resistance. And difficult circumstances and even difficult people provide that resistance. So I'd like to close our session by answering a couple of questions from participants. All right, I think I've done that right. Okay, first question. How do I handle the fear my team is experiencing at the realization that we won't be going back to the old normal? Man, that is a great question. So first off, it's been said there's really only two things that people don't like: the way things are and change. I find that to be true in my job, right? But look, you should create a sense of safety in your team by acknowledging that this situation is full of unknowns. Discuss their concerns openly and honestly. Remind them that while people often say that change is hard, in reality, we change effortlessly all the time. We are literally built for adaptation. Your body shivers when it's too cold and it sweats when it's too hot. We are designed to adapt to changing environments. We're made for it. We don't determine our futures, but we do determine our mindsets, and our mindsets can determine our futures. All right, next question. Can an organization have a strict hierarchy and still be anti-fragile? That's a really good question. So it depends on what you mean by strict. There's a difference between strict and rigid. In order for an organization to be anti-fragile, it must remain agile and adaptive. It's got to be flexible. We work in an environment characterized by complexity, as evidenced by this current crisis. That being said, in some organizations, certainly it's true in mine, there are practical reasons to maintain some bureaucratic structures. It is often a good idea to address issues like span of control, and you got to allow teams to specialize in certain domains. That's important. We can't all be generalists, but the key is for leaders to constantly remind individual teams to consider the impact of their work on other teams within the organization. There are no true silos because we are constantly affecting others in often unseen ways in all that we do. When it comes to giving direction and providing stricter oversight, it is important to remember that people don't primarily respond to what you do. They respond to how they feel they're being seen by you in what you do. So there's an inward and an outward way to maintain good order and discipline in an organization. Okay, I got time for one more question. Let me scroll through here. How can you foster an anti-fragile mindset within yourself? Okay, another great question. So you can begin by working to focus on processes instead of outcomes. You don't ultimately control the outcomes you achieve. There are just too many random variables, but you are generally in control of the processes you employ to achieve those goals. Your processes are within your sphere of control, and the outcomes are outside of your sphere of control. Your physical health is a lag measure of your sleep, your diet, your exercise habits. Your knowledge is a lag measure of your learning habits. You can begin building anti-fragility into your life by active improvement of the systems that you leverage in order to achieve your results. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'm going to turn you back over to Sarah for the wrap-up. Please stay safe and stay healthy. I sincerely appreciate the gift of your time.
Chip, as always, it is great to hear from you and learn from you on this really important topic of turning chaos into growth. One thing that you said that I really liked was this idea that we are all built for adaptation. We can grow through even the most difficult of times. We don't determine our environment, but we do determine our mindset. That's definitely something I'm going to take away with me today. Thank you so much, Chip, for joining us from your home in Kansas City. Reminder, this presentation has been recorded and will be made available to you later today. Again, we received many, many, many questions, far more than we can answer and far more than Chip can answer in this limited time we have. Following the session, I have the opportunity to sit down with Chip, virtually sit down with Chip and go through some more of those questions and answers that were submitted, do a little bit more in-depth conversation. That is recorded separately from this webinar presentation and is then put on our webinars page at arbinger.com/webinars. And you'll be able to find this Q&A recording as well as sessions from all of our previous webinars that we've hosted. At our last presentation, I announced the availability of our Leading in Crisis workshop, which is delivered virtually on April 14th. This is a 4-hour deep dive workshop with an Arbinger Master Facilitator. Remaining seats for that workshop are very limited, and we still have a few left. So if you are interested in learning more about that, please put your name just in the Q&A section here. That will be the easiest way to let us know that you're interested and would like to learn more about leading in crisis. Alternately, you can email us at info@arbinger.com to express your interest. If you haven't already followed Arbinger on LinkedIn or other social media, we encourage you to do that. We want you to be the first to get announcements of things that we're working on and sharing. We do have some really big news coming up that I'm not allowed to tell you about yet, but I'm really excited, and we will be all over social media celebrating and sharing it with you. So please follow Arbinger everywhere you can find us, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn especially. Don't forget, as I mentioned earlier, anything that you've learned from this or from our other presentations, please share it on your social media. Use the hashtag Outward Mindset so we can all learn from each other throughout this presentation and this series. Please join us tomorrow for our final in this series, a presentation called We Are All Doctors, How Outward Mindset Creates Unity in Chaos. And that's with Dr. Laura Lambert. If you haven't had the opportunity to learn from Laura yet, she is a fantastic presenter and has a very unique and important perspective as a doctor during this time of crisis. Again, please enter your name and email in the Q&A section to learn more about leading in crisis, or email us at info@arbinger.com. Thank you so much for being with us here today, and we'll see you tomorrow.